All right, so you want to dive deep into the world of starting and running your own business. We cracked open this Business Startup for Dummies bundle, and let me tell you, it's packed with good stuff, ready to get our hands dirty.
Absolutely. And I think a great place to start is by really understanding what the small business landscape actually looks like.
Yeah, and one thing that really jumped out at me from the book was this stat. They said that most businesses that end up failing, well, they don't even have a solid grasp on their financial position. Kind of makes you think, right?
It really highlights that passion alone isn't enough. The book does a good job of debunking this myth that funding is the biggest hurdle for new businesses. It really emphasizes having a solid business proposition, something you believe in and can confidently present when you're looking for investors.
So it's not just about loving your idea, it's about being business savvy as well.
Exactly. Of course, personal satisfaction and building wealth are huge motivators for entrepreneurs, and rightfully so. But the book really hammers home the importance of aligning your business aspirations with your actual skills and resources. Like, they use the example of starting a musical instrument repair shop versus starting, say, a bookkeeping service. One requires physical space, which obviously impacts what you can do from home, while the other might be more flexible.
That makes a lot of sense. But even if you're working from home, there are still hurdles, right? I mean, permits, regulations.
Absolutely. You've got planning consent to consider, building regulations, insurance requirements, and the book even dives into the often overlooked area of property deeds, stressing the importance of scrutinizing those for any restrictive covenants, even if you're a freeholder. It highlights those hidden complexities even in seemingly simple setups.
Wow, it's like navigating a legal maze before you even open your doors.
Mm.
The book also puts a lot of emphasis on self-assessment for aspiring entrepreneurs. What exactly does that look like?
It boils down to honestly evaluating your strengths, your weaknesses, and not just in terms of hard skills either. The book really advocates for the well-rounded founder, someone who might not be a specialist in one area, but can effectively juggle the various aspects of running a business. They contrast this with specialists who might excel in, say, marketing, but lack a broader perspective.
It reminds me of that example in the book, The Entrepreneur Who Built a Whole Empire by Buying and Selling Pub Chains. He wasn't necessarily the most talented pub owner himself, but he had this incredible knack for that specific niche.
Exactly, a perfect example of a well-rounded founder.
So we've talked about really understanding your strengths and weaknesses as an entrepreneur, but what about sizing up the competition? The book dives into competitive analysis, and I'm kind of curious what we can uncover there.
It's like detective work for business, really. Competitive analysis is about figuring out what your competitors are doing well, where they might be falling short, and how you can carve out your own unique space in the market.
Sounds like a recipe for strategic advantage. But where do we even begin? How do you actually go about dissecting the competition?
Well, the book introduces this really cool concept called the value chain. Basically, picture it as a map that outlines all the activities a business undertakes to create and deliver its product or service.
Okay, I'm picturing this value chain map. Now, what kind of insights can we actually glean from it?
It helps you understand the inner workings of your competitors. The book uses the airline industry as an example, which I think illustrates it well. Think about the range of business models you see in airlines.
Right, you've got everything from those budget airlines to those luxury international carriers.
Exactly. On one end, you have budget carriers like Ryanair. Their value chain is laser focused on efficiency, keeping costs incredibly low. They stick to direct flights, no frills service. Their target customer prioritizes price above all else.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have airlines like British Airways,
Hmm.
right? Completely different experience.
Totally. British Airways is your classic full service carrier. They've got a way more complex value chain because they offer a wider range of routes, frequent flyer programs, different cabin classes, all catering to a customer base that's willing to pay a premium for comfort and convenience.
So you can see how those two airlines, by comparing their value chains, how they differentiate themselves and target completely different segments of the market.
And here's where it gets really interesting. A company's value chain isn't static. It has to evolve and change as the market changes, as technologies advance. Like they tell the story in the book about NAE, this architecture and engineering firm. They used to handle absolutely everything in-house, from design to even producing the actual blueprints, right?
So they had a pretty comprehensive value chain from the sound of it. Why change what's working?
Well, technology caught up. Outsourcing those blueprints became way more efficient and cost-effective. So NAE recognized that shift and adapted their value chain. They went from doing everything to focusing on their core competencies, which were design and project management.
It's a great example of a business that stayed ahead of the curve, adapted to maintain their edge.
Absolutely. It highlights how important it is to constantly evaluate your value chain.
But
Look for areas of improvement and always be ready to adapt to new technologies, new market realities. But to really stand out from the crowd, you need to define your core competencies. You need to identify those things your business does exceptionally well.
it's like finding your business's superpower.
Right.
What is it that you do better than anyone else?
You got it. And it's not just about being good at something, it's about being the best, or at least among the best. The book uses Hertz car rental as an example. You might think their core competency is, well, just renting cars, but it goes way deeper than that.
Oh, I'm intrigued. So what is it about Hertz that makes them stand out?
It's their information system, their technology. It's incredibly sophisticated. It allows them to manage this massive global fleet, provide real-time booking and pricing, even personalize customer experiences using data analysis.
So their tech savviness translates into a tangible competitive advantage.
Exactly. They've leveraged technology to create a better customer experience, and that's key. Your core competencies should always translate into benefits for your customers. It's not just about what you do well internally, it's how that translates into value for the people you're serving. Now, it's important to note those core competencies, they're industry specific. What works for Hertz isn't necessarily going to apply to, say, a tech giant like Microsoft.
Right. So a software company's core competency might be centered around something like agility, rapid innovation, right?
Exactly. For Microsoft, their core competencies lie in managing these incredibly complex software ecosystems, adapting to rapid technological advancements, scaling their operations globally. It's all about identifying those unique strengths that set you apart within your specific industry. It makes you think even iconic brands can falter if they lose sight of their core competencies or fail to adapt, right?
Definitely a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
It shows how important continuous innovation is and being willing to evolve as a business. So we've analyzed the competition, pinpointed those core competencies. What's next on this roadmap?
Now we turn inward and really start planning for the future. And a crucial part of that is getting a grip on our finances, becoming financially literate, and approaching financial planning strategically. I know it's an area where a lot of entrepreneurs might feel overwhelmed, but the book does a fantastic job of breaking things down in a way that's easy to understand and apply.
Financial planning can definitely seem daunting, but having those tools and that knowledge is so essential, right? It's about making smart decisions, steering the ship in the right direction. So where do we even begin?
It starts with understanding the fundamentals. And don't worry, financial literacy is achievable. We need to look at potential threats to our business and think about how we can turn those into opportunities.
Okay, I like that approach.
Yeah.
Turn those threats into opportunities. So what kind of things are we talking about here?
This could be anything, really. It could be an economic downturn. It could be increased competition, maybe even entirely new competitors popping up, shifts in consumer behavior, maybe those preferences change. And of course, there's always the potential for those disruptive technologies to come along and shake things up.
So it's about acknowledging those potential challenges and proactively figuring out how to use them to your advantage.
Exactly. It's about anticipating those hurdles and having a plan in place to navigate them. And a key tool in all of this is a solid understanding of your financial statements.
Financial statements, those can definitely seem intimidating.
I get it, but they don't have to be. The book calls them your company's report card. And it's a fitting analogy because they provide a detailed snapshot of your business's financial health and performance.
So what kind of insights can we actually pull from those financial statements? What are we looking at here?
There are 3 key financial statements to keep in mind. You've got the income statement, the balance sheet, and the statement of cash flows. They each tell a different part of your business's financial story. Let's start with the income statement. It basically tracks your revenues and expenses over a specific period.
So the income statement tells you whether you're actually making money, if you're profitable.
Exactly. It gives you that bottom line view. Now, the balance sheet, that's like a snapshot of your company's financial position at a specific point in time. It shows you what your business owns. Those are your assets.
Okay, so assets are things like?
Things like cash, of course, but also things like inventory, the equipment you use to run your business, any property you own. And then on the flip side, the balance sheet also shows what your business owes to others. Those are your liabilities.
So liabilities are things like loans?
Loans, absolutely.
Yeah.
But also unpaid bills, what you owe to suppliers, any salaries you owe to employees, that kind of thing.
It's like the balance sheet weighs those two things, what you own and what you owe.
Exactly. And the difference between those two, between what you own and what you owe, that's your equity. It represents the owner's stake in the business.
Gotcha. So if a business has more assets than liabilities, that's a good sign, right? Means they're in a healthy financial position.
Exactly. It means they have positive equity. But if those liabilities outweigh the assets, well, that indicates the business is in debt and could be facing some financial challenges.
It's like learning a new financial language. Speaking of financial lingo, the book mentions the bookkeeping cycle. What exactly is that, and why is it so important?
Bookkeeping is essentially the foundation of your financial records. It's the process of recording all those business transactions, every sale you make, every expense you incur, every purchase, every payment, everything gets documented.
Sounds pretty meticulous. Like,
Right.
is it really that important to track every little thing?
It is. And the bookkeeping cycle is all about taking those raw transactions and transforming them into meaningful financial statements. It's about turning all that data into insights that can help you make informed decisions.
Okay, I see how that connects back to those financial statements we were just talking about. So bookkeeping is essential, but it sounds incredibly time-consuming.
It can be, but luckily technology can help streamline things. The book talks a lot about accounting software and how it can help automate tasks, reduce errors, and free up your time.
It's amazing how technology has revolutionized so many aspects of business, including something as fundamental as bookkeeping. But even with the best software, I imagine having a competent person managing those books is still critical, right?
Absolutely. Don't underestimate the value of a good bookkeeper or accountant. They're worth their weight in gold. They don't just ensure the accuracy of your records, they can also provide valuable financial advice. It's an investment that can pay huge dividends down the road.
It makes you realize how important financial literacy is for anyone running a business, really.
It's essential. And speaking of good financial practices, let's talk about audit trails for a moment.
Audit trails. Those sound a little, I don't know, ominous maybe.
They're not as scary as they sound. Think of an audit trail like a breadcrumb trail, but for your finances. It's essentially a documented history of every financial transaction in your business.
Okay, so it shows where the money came from, where it went, who approved what.
Exactly. It's about maintaining transparency and accountability.
But why is it so important? What purpose does a clear audit trail serve?
Several reasons. First and foremost, it's a legal requirement. If you're ever audited by tax authorities or any other regulatory bodies, you need to be able to back up your financial records. An audit trail provides that documentation. Second, a good audit trail helps prevent and detect fraud. If there's anything fishy going on, the audit trail can help you uncover it.
Okay, so it's about checks and balances, making sure everything is above board.
Right. It's about maintaining good financial hygiene, building trust, both internally and externally.
All right, let's talk about a topic that often strikes fear into the hearts of new business owners: taxes. What insights does the book offer for navigating that world?
Taxes are definitely an inevitable part of doing business. But the book does a good job of explaining things and assuring us that there are legal options for minimizing your tax burden.
Okay, minimizing that tax burden sounds good to me. What kind of options are we talking about here?
It really depends on your specific location, your business structure, all of that. But generally speaking, you've got things like deductions, credits, and even strategic timing of income and expenses.
Sounds like having a knowledgeable tax professional on your side is key.
Absolutely. Tax laws can be complex and are subject to change. Having a qualified expert in your corner to help you navigate those complexities can be invaluable.
Makes you appreciate the importance of building a strong team of advisors, right? From lawyers to accountants, you need people you can rely on to guide you.
You got it.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground with these financial statements, talked about the income statement, the balance sheet, even touched upon that bookkeeping cycle. But the book also really emphasizes the importance of understanding cash flow. And it seems like that's distinct from net income. So can you kind of elaborate on that difference? Why is cash flow so important?
Yeah, you're right to highlight that distinction. Net income, that's what we see on the income statement. It reflects profitability on paper. But cash flow, that's about the actual movement of cash in and out of your business. It's about having that liquidity, that actual money available to cover your expenses, to pay your employees, even to invest in those growth opportunities, really the lifeblood of your business.
So cash flow is about having the money in hand to actually keep things running, even if, say, your income statement looks good on paper. What are some of the things that can impact a business's cash flow?
The book does a really good job of explaining how changes in your assets and liabilities, those things we talked about on the balance sheet, how those can directly impact cash flow. Let's say, for example, your debtors. Those are your customers who owe you money. Let's say those increase significantly. That means even though your sales might be strong, you have less actual cash coming in to cover your immediate expenses.
Right, it's like waiting on those invoices to clear, but you still have bills piling up that need to be paid.
Exactly. And on the flip side, an increase in your creditors, those are the suppliers you owe money to that can actually improve your cash flow in the short term. Even though it represents an expense, delaying those payments to your suppliers means you have more cash on hand in the meantime.
So it's almost like a balancing act, managing those payment cycles strategically to make sure you have a healthy cash flow.
Exactly. The book actually breaks down this thing called the cash flow statement, which specifically tracks all those inflows and outflows of cash. And it's organized into three main categories. You've got operating activities, investing activities, and financing activities. And understanding how cash is moving within each of those categories, that can give you a much clearer picture of your overall cash position.
So it sounds like the cash flow statement provides a more dynamic view of the business's financial health. Now, we touched upon earlier some of those financial ratios that investors use to kind of size up a business. The book also delves into these things called solvency ratios, and they seem especially important for understanding a company's ability to actually meet its short-term obligations. Can you talk a bit more about these solvency ratios? What do they really tell us?
Absolutely. Solvency ratios are all about assessing a company's ability to pay its bills, to meet those short-term debts, and essentially avoid financial distress. One of the most common and important solvency ratios is the current ratio.
Okay, the current ratio. Now, what exactly does that measure?
The current ratio, it compares your current assets. Those are things you can quickly convert to cash. Things like, well, obviously cash itself, but also things like accounts receivable, short-term investments, and it compares those current assets to your current liabilities. Those are debts that are due within a year.
So, a healthy current ratio indicates that the business has enough liquid assets to cover those short-term debts, those obligations coming due. So what would be considered a healthy current ratio?
Well, generally speaking, a current ratio of 1.5 or higher, that's usually considered a good sign. It means that for every pound of current liabilities, the business has at least 1.50 pounds of current assets to cover those debts. However, and this is important, context matters a lot. Some industries, by their nature, or some businesses, based on how they manage their operations, they might operate perfectly fine with a slightly lower ratio. It really depends.
So, for example, a construction company with these big long-term projects that might have longer payment cycles, they might have a different current ratio than, say, a software as a service company that has those recurring subscription revenues, right?
Exactly. You have to consider those industry benchmarks, the specific dynamics of the business when you're interpreting these ratios. Now, there's another important solvency ratio that provides an even more stringent view of a company's short-term liquidity. It's called the quick ratio.
Okay, the quick ratio. So what makes that one more stringent than the current ratio? What's it focusing on?
The quick ratio, sometimes it's called the acid test ratio. It takes a more conservative approach by actually excluding inventory from current assets. And the reasoning there is that inventory, well, it might not always be easily converted to cash, especially if a business experiences, say, a sudden downturn. So the quick ratio gives you a clearer picture of a business's ability to meet those short-term obligations using its most liquid assets.
So a higher quick ratio, that suggests a greater ability to withstand maybe a financial shock or a sudden downturn.
Precisely. A quick ratio of 1 or higher, again, that's generally considered healthy. It suggests that a business has enough cash on hand or assets that can be readily converted to cash to cover those short-term liabilities.
Wow, this has been incredibly eye-opening. I mean, it sounds like understanding these solvency ratios can be so valuable for making informed decisions, whether you're a business owner, an investor, even a lender.
Absolutely. They give you that crucial window into the financial health and stability of a business.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've journeyed from that entrepreneurial mindset, understanding those customers, to dissecting the competition, even equipping ourselves with those essential financial literacy tools. As we wrap up, what are some of the key takeaways you'd want our listeners to really remember from this deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that building a successful business, it's a multifaceted thing. It's not just about having a great idea, right? It's about understanding your market, connecting with those customers, strategically outmaneuvering your competition, and of course, having a solid grasp of your finances.
It's about being resourceful, adaptable, and always being willing to learn and evolve as that business landscape changes, which it inevitably does.
Exactly. And never be afraid to ask for help along the way. Find yourself a mentor, connect with other entrepreneurs, and build a strong team of advisors. You need lawyers, accountants, financial professionals, people you trust to guide you.
Couldn't agree more. It's been a pleasure diving into these business fundamentals with you. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has sparked some ideas and equipped you with those essential insights to take your entrepreneurial dreams to the next level.